This is an alternative way of doing the best chips in the world ever. I just thought the way I did them the other day was a little bit of a faff and people might not want to kind of do that, so I just thought I'd see if I could make it just a little bit easier. This is the alternative method. So I'm happy to do it this way. So we've got some cling film and we're just going to have 3 layers of cling film all together, and then we'll just flatten it down. You'll understand why in a minute. I'll explain. So cling film like that. There's any air bubbles. Just going to use that as a barrier. Right, so see what I did there. This is a baking tray, quite a deep one with the chips in it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cook the chips in the oven instead of on top of the stove in a pan with a basket in, which is probably a little bit too much work for some people. So deep tray, chips in, and then we're going to cover with water. I've already boiled the water and I've already dissolved the salt in it. So I know that it's going to be 1.5 litres of water to cover it. So that was, salt wise, that was 2 tablespoons and a quarter, because we use 1 tablespoon, no sorry, that's wrong, not tablespoon, teaspoon. So we use 1.5 teaspoons of salt per litre of water. So for 1.5 litres of water, that is 2 teaspoons and a quarter of just normal salt. So water in, salted. The water was boiling, so it just speeds up the cooking process, and it also melts the salt, so it's just all distributed evenly. So then we put the cling film on top, and what's that going to do is that it's going to keep the chips submerged under the water, because we don't want them to rise into the top and browning or drying out in the hot air of the oven. So that cling film is just going to serve as a purpose, just to keep the chips down, and we'll put another layer completely on top. Now cling film, unless it's in the oven at a really high temperature or exposed to a naked flame, doesn't burn, so there's going to be no problem with this melting in the oven, because we're going to put it in at 150 degrees for probably about an hour until the chips are nice and soft. I just think this potentially, it's still going to be a faff of a way to do it, but I think it might just be a different take on it. So this is now going to go in the oven, and it's going to sit there for about an hour at 150 degrees until the chips are nice and tender. If it takes a little bit longer, I will tell you when I take the video out, but I'm doing it as I go along rather than trying it out and then making another video, so I've got like more chips to have to make. I'm just going to wing it and see how it works. So the chips has now been in the oven for 2 hours. That's probably longer than actually needed, but I got a bit sidetracked when I was out talking to people. So probably about an hour and a half at 150 degrees, and the chips would be nice and tender. As you can see, when you push the knife in, there's no resistance at all, so they just fall straight off the knife, and they're all cooked all the way through. What you can just leave them to cool down in the water, but we ideally want some of that liquid to evaporate off. So we're going to take them out, and because they're on a tray, they're going to be easier to get out of the tray of the water onto a tray, so they can steam a little bit dry, like that. Just a fish slice, stroke spatula underneath, and then just onto a tray, and then they'll steam dry. You just have to really let them go cold. They don't need to be in the fridge overnight. It's not essential. They just have to go down to cold to room temperature, so they firm up. They will just fall to bits. If you try and cook them now in the fat, they'll just fall to bits. So they need to go cold to firm up, and then you can cook them. So they just need to go back down to like room temperature and steam off some of that excess moisture. But ideally, best off left on a tray in the fridge overnight, uncovered, and then it'll draw quite a lot of moisture out of them. But this is just an experiment and just an easier way of making the best chips you'll ever taste. I have had a little thought about these potatoes on the tray, and there is a little bit of water collecting at the bottom. I'm just slightly worried that they're going to be sitting in water, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them on the tray with some kitchen paper on, just to soak up that excess amount of water, because it's going to be no good if they're kind of sitting in that amount of water. So I think I'll do that, and I've got another batch of chips to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try this batch uncovered and see if you actually need to put the cling film and cover the chips with like cling film or foil if you actually need to do that, because I don't really like using plastic if I don't have to. So I'm going to do the second batch without the cling film on top and see how it goes. if they cook all right. So that's that. Yeah, so I'm going to put some paper underneath there to soak up that excess moisture, and then I'm going to do that with those. So I just kind of wanted to add that before we move on. Right, so this is the second batch of chips. They took forever to cook because I didn't cover them, so I would suggest that they need to be covered. If you want to cut down the plastic, you don't have to use cling film. A piece of kitchen parchment would be fine if it's just resting on top of the water, or some tin foil would work just as well. You can see where they haven't been covered by the water there. You can just see they've gone brown. I'll keep those. We'll see how they cook tomorrow. But I'm going to scoop these out, put them on a tray with some paper on, and then they'll dry out in the fridge overnight. So in the other video I explained why you have to put salt into the water. I'll quickly go through that. So it's per litre of water, it's 1.5 teaspoons of salt. It seems like quite a lot, but it doesn't make the potatoes too salty at all. You've just got to remember not to put any salt on after you've cooked them once you've deep fried them. The idea is that we're going to be cooking in beef dripping, and that's an oil or fat, and these are potatoes which are mostly made up of water. Water and fat don't mix, so you need to season the potatoes with salt to get some flavour right through to the centre of the potatoes. All the beef dripping is going to do is just basically coat the outside and flavour the outside of the chip, whereas if you salt them in salted water, you're going to get that salt going all the way through to the centre, and they'll taste nice rather than just flavour on the outside and fluff on the inside. I don't really agree with steaming potatoes because I don't think you can season them properly, so I always immerse potatoes in water so you can actually season them properly. But that's it for now. We'll faff around with the tabletop fryer tomorrow and cook some chips, whatever. Right, chips have been drying out in the fridge overnight. The tabletop fryer is up to temperature. I'm using, well, it's beef dripping, but it's got other things in it as well, like a bit of chicken fat. There'll probably be a bit of lard in there as well. 160 degrees. So the first batch of chips for the first cooking is going to go in now. I might add a few more chips. I don't use this very often, so I forget how much it can hold. I can put a few extra in. That'll be fine. And that there. So what we're first trying to do is just get a bit of flavour into the chips and a little bit of colour. This is the second cooking of the chips. In fact, there will be a third cooking where what the process of that is to just to get them really kind of crispy, really kind of quickly, and we'll turn it up to 190 degrees. But first we'll cook all the chips at 160, take them out once they're cooked in batches, dry them on some kitchen paper, and then we'll let them go cold, and then crank up the heat, and then we'll cook them for the third time. At this stage, you can't freeze them once you've you can freeze them. You can freeze anything you like, but it's best if you're going to make a lot of chips and then freeze them. It's best to freeze them after you've cooked them the first time in the fat, and then what you can simply do is defrost them out of the freezer and then cook them for the third time in the fat. And it's not the best way of doing it, but it will give you a substantially better chip than you could possibly buy anyway. So that's quite a good way of doing it. I'll turn this, put the lid on. I don't think it's getting too steamy. You can't freeze them after you cook them for the third time and then cook them for the fourth time, because it just doesn't work particularly well. And if you freeze them when they've just been boiled in the water, they tend to go really soft and want to fall to bits, and the water wants to come out of them and they get a bit soft and they're not as nice to eat. So if you're going to freeze them, it's always best to do it after this process here. Let them go cold on baking parchment, on kitchen paper, and then freeze them in batches. Apart from that, I'm not sure entirely how long this will take. I'm not really used to using tabletop fryers, so it's all a bit. I've only used it once or twice, and I store it in the shed, so it's a bit rusty. But it's clean. It's just a bit rusty. So I think that's it for the moment. We'll come back when these chips are ready, and I'll show you how they need to look after the first cooking in beef dripping. Right, so personally, I think for the first cooking of the chips, in fact, I think 160 is too high, so I'm going to cook them at 130. I just don't think it's got time to taste the fat to penetrate as much as I would like, and they're going a little bit too brown too quickly for me. I would have preferred them to be a bit longer and being a little bit more opaque. That's a big word for today. So this batch is now cooked, and they've got some colour, but that's more the colour I'd want on by the time they're getting ready to be for the third cooking. So I'm going to turn it down to 130, and I'm going to cook the next batch at 130 and see if they turn out just that little bit better for me. So you don't need to see that. We'll stop and then we'll come back and we'll see if 130 works. Right, so you can see it's not cooking as violently at 130 degrees. I think that's a better temperature to cook them on for the second time. I don't know why, I just got a feeling about it, that's all. I think the flash fry in the last cook will be a good thing, but I just think this process, what it's going to do is going to dry the edges out of the chips so they can become a lot crisper, and because they're drying out, they'll take on a little bit more flavour of the fat. So I think 130 is what I would recommend. Normally everyone seems to talk about cooking the chips for the second time or for the first time in fat on 160 degrees. I think that's a little bit too high, so 130, we'll see how it goes. Right, so definitely 130 degrees C is the temperature it wants to be for the second cooking of the chips. The second cooking of the chips, the first cooking in the fat. As you can see, the chips are starting to rise to the top of the fat, so that looks like they are ready. And what's happened is, I don't know if you can see too well, maybe a little bit. You can see ish that they're starting to dry out on the outside, which is a good thing, which means they're going to be crisper. So I think I'm definitely sure that 130 is going to be right. They're floating and they've gone a little bit puffy on the outside. I can see, you'll just have to trust me. Certainly this is going to be the best way for this method of cooking chips. Like everything in life, there are loads and loads and loads of different ways of doing things. This is my way of doing things and the way I think that it gets the best results. You can just buy frozen chips and cook them in the deep fry if you like. You can buy microwave chips, you can buy oven chips, you can do what you like, but I think this method is going to give the best results. So that's it. I'm going to drain those off, I'm going to cook the next batch, and then we'll let them go cold, and then we're ready for cooking them at maybe not 190 degrees. We'll probably try them out about 180, and that'll probably crisp them up just as good as 190. I don't like getting two things high in temperature, because what you're doing is you're taking the fat to its flash point when it's going to start burning, and I don't want the taste of burning fat in anything. So if you keep it 180, I think I'd be happier at that temperature. So that's fine. So we'll drain those off, stop the video and we'll drain those off and do the next batch, and then the next video will be about the final cooking. So the chips are cold and the fat is now hot. We've got it at 170 and it's just got a little bit of haze of smoke about it. So I think I don't want it any hotter than that. So 170 is the temperature, and not too many chips because we don't want to cool the fat down too much, otherwise it will stop frying. So hopefully this will be just the right temperature. Maybe I want them to be a little bit hotter. No, it'll be fine. That'll be fine. It'll soon get going and they'll soon crisp up. It's quite nice watching chips fry. Yeah, I think that's hot enough, is that? Anything more than that, and the outside's going to crisp up before the inside is hot. Yeah, that's definitely hot enough. I think this my method of cooking chips seems like quite a bit of hard work, really. I'm not kind of advising the average person to do it, but if you want a little bit of a project and you want to get better at cooking chips, I think I'm going to turn that down a bit to 160. I think if you want to get better at cooking chips, I think there's some methods in here that you could certainly adopt that would improve it. I think the main things to adopt are poaching the potatoes in the salted water. Then you can get some flavour right into the centre of the potatoes. And I think allowing the potatoes to cool down between cooking, I think that's another good thing to adopt. And certainly about temperatures, that's an important thing to think about. And I think use of beef dripping over oil, I think that's also quite an important part. And also, now we're almost ready. Also varieties of potatoes as well. I generally go for a Malfoma or a Sagitta potato, which are what we use for chips in the UK. They're also very good for mashing and for roasting as well. So it's a very good all-round potato. I think we'll take these to the brink of crispiness, I think, today. And up a bit more, I think. I tend to make my own beef dripping. I just think if I make it, there's certainly a lot more taste to it. Rather than, you can buy it, but I think it's I don't think there's any kind of flavour to it. It just tastes like solid oil, rather than a good quality beef dripping, which should taste quite salty and kind of quite beefy of all things. And then if anything that you cook in that is going to take on some of that flavour, only on the outside, because the oil's not going to penetrate to the centre of the chips. I would also say that because of the surface, there's less surface area with bigger chips, they are slightly better for you than what we class as fries, which are like skinny chips. And that's just about it. So we'll drain that. I don't want to be any crisper than that. Turn off because I'm not going to cook anymore. And I'll pause and then I'll move the camera and then we can have a look at the chips in the container that I'm going to eat them out of. And there we go. Nice and golden, nice and crispy. They're going to taste wonderful. I think out of preference I would want to cook the chips for the first time in a pan of water rather than bake them in the oven in water. I just think you get a better result from a pan of water. It's slightly quicker. I don't know why. Maybe it's just my preference. But it's a good alternative if you don't want to be messing around with pans of water and colanders and all that kind of thing. You can simply just bake them in the oven in a covered container in some water, and that works very well. But yeah, I think a bit of a faff, but well worth it.